Welcome to Extremes of the Human Experience, where we explore ideas and people, good and bad, to discover who we are as human beings and who we can be. On this episode of Extremes of the Human Experience, we will be looking at 4 times the United States has overthrown democratically elected governments. Leaving public school in modern-day America, one is left from its history classes with a rather rosy picture of the United States. It was always presented to me as the bulwark of democracy, concerned only with spreading this democracy to the rest of the world. As I began to take more of an interest in history, though, I began to see that the United States government has engaged and does engage in actions that the general public would denounce with righteous anger when done by other countries. The implications of this anger being that we would never do something like that. But the road from British colony to international superpower is not only a comparatively short one, but also one that could not be paved entirely with good intentions. So let's take a look at some of the more tarnished bricks in our road. If you have ever seen the movie Argo, then you have been at least introduced to US involvement in the Iranian coup d'etat in 1953. Prior to the coup, Iran was run by democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. When Mossadegh attempted to nationalize Iranian petroleum reserves, though, the ideal of democracy saw itself trumped by British and American resource interests, a theme that, unfortunately, will dominate this video. While the initial reaction was to boycott Iranian oil, a move that did have political and economic ramifications for Iran and Mossadegh, the ice broke when Mossadegh claimed emergency powers to deal with this crisis, and plans to instigate a coup were begun. President Truman balked at the idea of a coup, fearing the precedent it would set for future CIA involvement in foreign affairs. But President Eisenhower, who succeeded him, had no such qualms, and he and Winston Churchill set about the overthrow of Mossadegh. By bribing officials and funding pro-revolution riots, British and American intelligence agencies were successful in ousting Mossadegh from power and strengthening the monarchical rule of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, better known as the Shah of Iran, a position he would hold for the next 26 years. The Shah was a great appreciator of Britain, America, and their respective interests, once saying, "I owe my throne to God, my people, my army, and to you," meaning the Americans and British. The coup, on the other hand, was said to have ended Iran's drive to assert sovereign control over its own resources and helped put an end to a vibrant chapter in the history of the country's nationalist and democratic movements. Our second case is almost an exact mirror image of the first. It, too, involved a US-led overthrow of a democratically elected government, features a leader who, God forbid, sought to nationalize the resources of his country so that this country could claim sovereignty, was set against the backdrop of the Cold War, and effectively ended the country's hopes for national independence and democracy. This is the case of Patrice Lumumba and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Though Lumumba was the first democratically elected prime minister of the country, his election immediately following the Congo's fight for independence from Belgium, at the time of his assassination, the country was essentially run by 4 different regimes. Lumumba sought to both unify these 4 corners of the Congo and nationalize their natural resources. The United States, fearing the loss of one of the most resource-rich countries on the planet during the Cold War, decided to oust Lumumba, and the African political leader was assassinated. While there exist conflicting stories of who carried out the actual assassination, there were undoubtedly CIA plans in the works to have Lumumba killed, and the coup that eventually captured and killed the prime minister was assisted by both the United States and Belgium. In his place stepped one of the most repugnant dictators to have ever ruled, Joseph Mobutu, a man who reigned over an era of extensive human rights violations and used his power to amass a staggering personal fortune while bleeding his country dry. The extent of his corruption is unknowable, but estimates of his embezzlement range from anywhere from $4 to $15 billion. Patrice Lumumba's assassination has been described as a stumbling block to the ideals of national unity, economic independence, and Pan-African solidarity that Lumumba had championed, as well as a shattering blow to the hopes of millions of Congolese for freedom and material prosperity. I always used to wonder what US reaction would be if a country democratically decided to run itself as communist. And after hearing the stories of Mossadegh and Lumumba, you can probably guess what the answer is. But let's look at it anyway with the case of Salvador Allende of Chile. A physicist by trade, Allende made 3 unsuccessful bids for president in 1952, 58, and 64, eventually winning the election of 1970, and winning it with the title of the first Marxist president in a Latin American country to be elected through free elections. Allende had been on the United States radar long before his successful election, however, with declassified documents showing that between 1962 and 1964, the CIA had spent $3 million on anti-Allende propaganda. After assuming power, he began his program of La Vía Chilena al Socialismo, or the Chilean Path to Socialism, which, among other things, included the nationalization of Chilean industries, better known as the death sentence. Not all Chileans were enthused by the social reforms, with the United States in general and the CIA in particular stoking this anger, and on September 11, 1973, the Chilean military, backed by the CIA, fomented a coup. Allende committed suicide during the coup, a fact that was highly suspect until several independent investigations, as well as Allende's family, ruled that it was, in fact, a suicide. Allende was succeeded by General Augusto Pinochet and his military junta, ending a span of 4 decades of democracy in Chile. The junta promptly dissolved the Congress of Chile, suspended the constitution, and persecuted any and all political dissidents. After the coup, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger told President Nixon that we, the United States, didn't do it, but we helped them, created the conditions as great as possible. The fourth case, and in my opinion perhaps the most egregious, is of Jacobo Arbenz. Arbenz was the second democratically elected president of Guatemala, taking power in 1951, and was instrumental in the Guatemalan Revolution that overthrew US-backed dictator Jorge Ubico in 1944. In his inaugural address, Arbenz promised to transform Guatemala from a backward country with a predominantly feudal economy into a modern capitalist state. His popularity among the Guatemalan people was immense, and his plans for agrarian land reform were highly influential throughout Latin America. On paper, Arbenz was the picture of the global spread of democracy espoused by the United States. So what went wrong? Well, surprise, surprise, part of Arbenz's plans included nationalizing Guatemalan resources and moving away from foreign dependence. This ran afoul of the powerful United Fruit Company, or UFC, which launched an intense lobbying campaign against Arbenz in the United States. Despite Arbenz paying twice what the UFC had paid per acre for the land that Guatemala was reappropriating, United Fruit's pressure mounted, and, not surprisingly, rumors began to circulate that members of Arbenz's regime were communists. Soon, the plans for a coup were put in place. While at first glance this would seem like a corporation dictating US foreign policy, running Arbenz out of Guatemala served American interests too. If Arbenz was successful in nationalizing Guatemalan resources, it would embolden other leaders throughout the world held under the thumb of American influence. If, on the other hand, his attempts were quashed, it would send an equally strong message to US-dominated countries with ideas of their own about sovereignty. Arbenz, thus, was exiled. The military junta, led by Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas, that took power after the coup began a swift purge of communists, imprisoning and executing thousands. Arbenz lost power in 1954, and Guatemala would not experience representative democracy again until 1996, over 40 years later.
I don't give a fuck.
Arbenz would get the last laugh though, for in 2011 the Guatemalan government issued a formal apology to his surviving kin. After a closer reading of history during the Cold War, it seems readily apparent that the fear of the domino theory of communism was, in fact, the fear of the domino theory of nationalization. In fact, I do not think it would be difficult to argue that the United States would have much of a problem with a country turning to communism if it could be assured that none of its interests in that country would be interfered with. So what's the point? The point is that the less informed we are about a particular decision, the less likely we are to make a reasonable decision.
Physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it.
Take the recent Russia scandal, where Americans all over the country were up in arms that a group of people could do such a thing as meddle in a democratic election. Well, after watching this video, hopefully you'll see it more as a case of us losing at our own game, for this video is certainly not exhaustive of US meddling in foreign affairs, nor is it an exhaustive list of the times that the United States has meddled in democratic elections in foreign affairs.
Yeah, well, we won't get got, though. We gon' get. CD, people like us, we don't get got. We go get.
That's right. You won't see us getting scammed.
No way.
The truth is, the United States does not occupy some morally superior position to the rest of the world. America is, and this might come as a surprise, populated with and governed by humans. And as humans, once we get the taste of power, we will go to extraordinary lengths to maintain and increase this power, even undermining ideals that we once fought to have for ourselves. I think the realization of this will help us better distinguish between the boogeymen in our world and the people who are fighting and dying for things that we have long since taken for granted, but who simply have something that we want. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe to our channel for more videos that wallow in the muck of the extremes of the human experience.